what if I told you that the most powerful force shaping your career, your relationships, and even your daily decisions is something you can barely see, Tim?
I'm curious. What is it?
It's super common in our world, but it's something we don't necessarily think about on a regular basis.
Oh, okay. So back to my original question. What is it?
Don't you just know? Don't you know?
If it's
No,
invisible, tell me.
Well, in this episode of Behavioral Grooves, we're going to do a deep dive into this invisible architecture of status. And we're going to talk about that with Toby Stuart, professor at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business and author of Anointed, How Status Shapes Our Lives.
Yeah. So status isn't just about designer handbags or fancy job titles. According to Toby, it's humanity's greatest invisible force, determining everything from which resumes get callbacks to how we evaluate art or music or even scientific discoveries. Toby reveals how this hidden system operates through three distinct channels: merit, anointment, and those characteristics we're simply born with.
Yeah, and I'm not born with any of them. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. We're living through what Toby calls an evaluation crisis, as AI often makes it impossible to distinguish human created work from machine generated content. We're defaulting even more heavily to these status markers and to pedigree to make decisions about what's important or what's valuable to us.
Yeah, okay. But before we head over to our conversation with Toby, we need to let listeners know that this is our last episode before our
It's our last episode? What?
It's the last episode before October 16th, 2025.
Oh, good. I thought you were going to tell me something I didn't know here.
It's the last episode before our celebration in Minnesota on October 16th, 2025, which is going to be a live event. And we would love for you to join us. Make this last minute decision now. Just do it. Come and join us.
Yeah, I mean, come on. We're hop on a plane to tonight and come join us, because I don't know when this is going out, but come join us. And we're celebrating 500 episodes and 8 years of doing this podcast. And we're going to do it with Professor Nick Epley from the University of Chicago, who is going to be the keynote speaker. And he's even going to not just talk to us, he's going to conduct a live experiment. And it's going to be a fun experiment, not those kind where you get shocked or anything like that. It's going to be a really fun experiment. All right. So hop on the train, jump on the plane, get in your car, whatever it is. If you have to travel 100 miles, 1,000 miles, doesn't matter. Come join us in Minneapolis on October 16th.
Don't prime people that this is going to be painful. It's just going to be fun.
All right.
Yes, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have even brought it up. It's going to be fun. All right. Back to our conversation with Toby Stuart on status. In our conversation with Toby, we're going to talk about how status functions like a renewable resource that compounds over time.
Like interest on your money, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or why isolation might be more dangerous than power for leaders.
Because it's really lonely at the top.
Of course. Absolutely. And how understanding these dynamics might just change how you see the world.
And it might just help you find your groove.
I'm Tim Houlihan, here with my longtime partner, Kurt Nelson, and this is Behavioral Grooves.
Okay. So with that, it's time to sit back and relax with a cup of fully, freshly brewed status and enjoy our conversation with Toby Stuart.
Toby Stuart, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you, Tim. It's a super pleasure to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation.
We are too. And we're going to, of course, get started with a couple of loosening up questions. Would you prefer to learn a new language or a new instrument?
So the answer is both. And the answer is both, and the truth is neither, because I have a brain that can accommodate neither of those tasks, because I have throughout my life tried to learn languages and play instruments, and I am an abysmal failure at both. So, if pushed to one or the other, I take instrument.
Okay.
Wow. Well, you got in good gracious with Tim there, and I will
Yep.
tell you, Toby, you and I are exactly the same. I have, over the course of 58 years, tried many musical instruments, failed miserably, tried many different, well, actually not tried many different, but I've tried Spanish multiple times. Still can't. Still, I can order a beer. That's about it in Spanish.
I
So
mean, and that's what I can do in Spanish. And I bet you did exactly what I did, which is when you got the sense that that lockdown was coming, you rushed an order into Amazon for an electric guitar because you were gonna like relive your adolescent fantasies by learning to play Stairway to Heaven or Freebird during COVID, which is exactly what I
yeah,
attempted and failed to do.
Oh, well,
I
you
got the
tempted
acoustic.
though.
I got the acoustic version, so
Yeah,
not the electric, but the
yeah.
acoustic. There we go.
Yeah, yeah, that was a
See,
panic buy right before lockdown.
I took mine out of the closet where it had been gathering dust for like 5 years. So there you go. All right, Toby, speed round. We're supposed to be moving through these quickly. Are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker? What is it that I just saw you drinking there? Was it?
I mean, yeah, that
Ah,
one, there's no question. I mean, I just love coffee, love it. So I every day it's a battle to not overconsume. So I will nurse. I drink. I mean, I love espresso, but I drink drip coffee so I can nurse it all day long because I enjoy it so much. The smell, the taste, even cold coffee. So coffee,
Yeah.
hands
what does
down.
all day mean? Is
I
all day
mean,
mean like
so
until
I
11 or noon or?
Yeah, no, all day typically means more towards like 3, 4, 5 p.m. So,
Oh
and
wow.
it's inched up over time. So, I started with I'm sticking to 16 ounces, and now it's like 24 ounces, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Are you
So,
headed to rehab soon? This sounds serious.
so the good thing is the recent research is like I'm prolonging my life and and increasing my health span. So by all accounts, this is a very good vice to have.
As vices go, I think it's a good one. I have a every Wednesday I go to Rotary and I have Rotary meeting in the morning and they have brewed nicely brewed coffee that I drink 3 or 4 cups during the course of an hour and a half, and then I come home. I normally have a cup every day, but when I come home on Wednesdays, I'm just jittery. Do you drink decaf or are you a caffeinated guy? Is it?
Yeah, I just don't tend to go to decaf. I mean, I really, I mean, no, I don't. I mean, I'm caffeine only. So
Mm,
caffeine only.
Okay.
I, I, I need to change, but I can't either. So I don't know why. So
Okay. All right. Well, enough coffee. I'm curious. I want to ask a speed round question about the book. Which is more dangerous for someone at the top, isolation or power?
Mm. That's a really interesting question. Isolation. I mean, isolation's just dangerous, period. I totally believe in the loneliness epidemic,
mm,
and that's that'd be jumping way ahead, but that definitely I think is a potential byproduct of being at the top. There is like most of the old adages, there is something to the concept of lonely at the top.
mm, yeah,
Yeah.
I think we'll get into that even more as we start talking about various different things. The last of our speed round questions, Toby, is if you could eliminate one status based bias from society, do you have one that comes to mind that you would say, "Yep, snap my fingers and this one is gone"?
Grace.
Oh, in how? Okay, all right. We need to go expand upon
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
before we start talking about the other stuff, what about that is the reason you want to get rid of it? Why is that standing above the others?
Well, I mean, so transitioning into the book, there are really status really comes from three places, and one place, which is the one that I think we'd like to think the world works this way, is some version of merit. Like, status is this funny resource because it's given to you by a group, it's the deference or respect that you get from other members of a group, and it's a very valuable resource. We'll get into that. We'll get into that later. And part of your status is earned because you do something that the group really values, and the group kind of has this currency to give you back, which is respect. And most of us would like to think that's the way the world works. Like the prominent people, the prestigious people, they're the ones who have done something really significant or valuable for some version of a collective. Now, without trying to go all over the place, right? When we open up, um, when I say that, I should point out that groups value really, really different things, right? So you can imagine like you're like a member of an inner city gang, and like how do you earn
Yeah.
status in that group? Well, how do you think you earn status in a street gang, right? I mean, it's like you're the gnarliest, most
Being
willing to
tough.
engage in, yeah, like you're the one who'll do the gratuitous violence or whatever. But most of our groups, like the workplace or most civic organizations or friendship groups, you earn status by doing something good for the group. So that's one source of status. The second one is kind of where the title comes from. It's anointment, and that is you get status by being blessed or even just sort of affiliated with by somebody who already has status. So organizations and people who have status give it out all the time. So like imagine a prestigious university, I've been at a number of them. They all give out degrees, and every year what they do is they confer status on somebody else. But the third one, which gets us back to the opening, is what we called ascribed characteristics. And in all groups, in all societies, in all places, in all times, certain individual characteristics are valued above others. And like, historically, you just like the easiest example of this, like a caste system. Like you are just born into a place in the status hierarchy, and you are what you were born to. And we call that an ascribed characteristic because it's ascribed to you at birth. Like you don't choose it, you can't help it. It's just the life lottery. But it turns out, and I'm getting long winded here, so I want to pass the mic back to you guys. But it turns out that one of these characteristics is race. And we often associate status differences with race. And, they deeply bother me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Hey Groovers, we're interrupting your regularly scheduled programming with some big news, and we want you to be a part of it.
That's right. We've got not one, but two massive milestones hitting at the same time, and we're throwing a party to celebrate both of them.
Okay, so milestone number 1, we are about to cross 500 episodes this fall. When we started this thing back in 2017, Tim, did you ever dream that we would make it to 500? I didn't.
No, not at all. Never crossed my mind. And milestone number 2, it's our 8th anniversary. So we're combining both celebrations into a single, epic, live event in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and that live event is going to happen October 16th, 2025. So mark your calendars. And we're going to be taking over a private room at Malcolm Yards in my hometown of Minneapolis, where Tim used to live when he was cool. And here's the kicker. If you attend, you'll get to participate in a live behavioral science experiment with Nick Epley.
Yeah, the famous University of Chicago professor, the researcher who proved that talking to strangers can actually make your day better. He will be sharing some observations on a happy life, and the audience will participate in a hands-on experiment.
And this isn't just a party, it's science in action. So check the show notes for details, but consider this your personal invitation to join Tim and me, as well as many other people, on Thursday, October 16th in Minneapolis. Make your travel plans. Sign up now. Make it happen, folks. Here we go.
We can't wait to see you. And until then, keep finding your groove.
This goes back into the book where you are bringing in some of the different studies that are out there that show, look, if you have a resume and you have a African American sounding name versus a more white sounding name, people confer various different things on it, various different aspects. So is that what you're saying? Let's get rid of that aspect of this element of status, that race should not come into this at all.
So the book has a number of these stories. The resume is one of them where it's I'm gonna ask you to have a little thought experiment with me. And the experiment goes, you have the same object, and it really doesn't matter what the object is. So like I'm holding up in front of the camera this phone. This happens to be an iPhone, so it's an object. It does a certain set of things. It's an object, and we could call this an apple, or we could call this a anything else. I won't denigrate another brand. It could be an Apple, or it could be an anything else phone. And the value of the phone is different based on the identity characteristic associated with it, in particular, the status of the actor that's associated with it. That thought experiment is like massively prevalent, where you have one object and it could be in multiple identity states. So let's now take a resume. Like you take a resume, and there's this beautiful study that a couple of former colleagues did, where they took a bunch of resumes and they made them into pairs, where you take literally exactly the same work history, same words, same titles, same companies, same everything, and all you do is you change the name, but the name cues race. So the name suggests that the person with the resume is Caucasian male or black male, or Caucasian female or Hispanic female. And these are called audit studies. You send them around and you actually then look at who gets called back. Okay, now again, to repeat, it's the identical resume. So there should be an identical callback rate if you send them out to 10,000 random employers. But guess what happens?
They
You don't have to
don't
guess.
get called back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what happens. Everybody in the audience knows what happens as well. So the callback
Right.
rate is very different based on the implied race of the name.
Yeah. It's brutal, isn't it? It's absolutely brutal that the world works that way. We are talking with Toby about his new book, Anointed, and you describe status as humanity's greatest invisible force, maybe most powerful invisible force. How can something so invisible, so unseen, have such dramatic impacts on health and wealth and career trajectory?
Yeah, I think lots and lots of things are unseen, though. So, so some of status is very much seen, right? There's all these and then the way that I think people will often, maybe the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about status is like people will think conspicuous consumption kinds of things, like these really exclusive logos that you see on nameplates on cars or handbags or clothing or whatever. So the classic. So there's a lot of status that we just directly see, but there's then knock-on effects of status that we don't see and we don't think about. And then there are status-based processes that are pretty close to reflexive, they're like ingrained behavior, and we conform to the rules of the status system, but we don't often like really sit and think, okay, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. Like it's so prevalent that it just becomes reflexive behavior. And for both of those reasons, sort of the knock-on effects that I think most people don't really think about, and the just more implicit, quiet, like there's a status process happening in the background, and that's what determines things in your life, but you just don't even really think about it.
Yeah, this idea that there's this reflexive element to it reminds me that mental shortcuts, heuristics, are these quick reflexive kinds of things, right? That it helps us navigate our way through the world with the least amount of thinking. Do you think that there are times when some level of intentional ignorance could be beneficial to us?
Oh, absolutely. Great question. So, there's I'm not a psychologist, but I've lived my whole career amongst psychologists, and I've lived my whole career in these discipline-based business schools, which means I've operated in this world of like economics, psychology, sociology, finance, and increasingly computational social science, which is a little bit of a mashup of all of the above, but looking at really big data sets. And so I have read a great deal of psychology and spent a great deal of time with psychologists. And the argument about heuristics is really that we need them, right? I mean, we need to be efficient, because there is, and particularly in the modern world, but even before, there's just like infinite choice.
Yeah.
Literally, like if you sit down and you just think, what should I do today, or what can I do today? Excuse me, there's no limit. You can do like endlessly, like literally, even if all you're going to do is, plant your ass in a chair and take out your phone and look at stuff, there's
Yeah.
infinity to look at effectively. Like there
Mhm.
is so much content at your fingertips that like it wouldn't end in a thousand lifetimes, right? So it's effectively infinite. And so for all of these things we need shortcuts. And the kind of classic shortcuts are these mental heuristics, that just allow us to move quickly to a decision point, and that also affect how we think about decisions. And and those are complex because while they might move people away from some optimal outcome, they move people quickly to an outcome. And there's a lot of benefits, cognitive benefits to expediency. And one of the arguments I make in the book is status is one of these things that operates in a way like a heuristic. Like it helps us make choices about what to consume, and it helps us make choices about how to behave, and helps us make choices about how to split up resources. And it often does all those things invisibly. Like it determines what you're even considering in the first place, like what makes it on the shelf, so to speak. So it reduces your choice set in the background in ways that like we don't even ever think about. But by doing that, it brings us closer to actually like making decisions and getting on with it.
Toby, do you think it's a good proxy in those examples? And again, I'm thinking about this in, you brought up the Apple versus an orange phone, right? Or whatever
Right.
other named phone, right? Is that always is probably the wrong term here, but is status a good proxy for making those shortcuts? In other words, because something has status, does that, because as we talked about at the very beginning, merit should be part of some of this component. So if merit is the main part of it, then that would be reflective of being a good proxy for something along that line. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that merit is the sole reason for status, nor might even have any aspect of it, if I understand that right. Is that my
Yeah. So, I mean, so that's a super complicated question, because I think the answer to the question, I think
You
the
have
answer to
60
that question,
seconds, go.
yeah, exactly. So I think, so I think the answer to that question,
Uh,
I mean, I like to answer that. I'm going to put it this way: to answer that, I have to ask you I have to ask you a question, which is,
okay?
you asked me is you effectively asked me, okay, so we're going to rely on status to make a decision. Okay, so I'm going to buy an iPhone. An iPhone's not a very good example, but I'm gonna buy something because it's a high status. I'm going to get a degree at Stanford University because it's a high status university.
Right.
Okay, but when you make that decision, you probably, a student, say, making that decision probably doesn't have a super clear idea of like, that's where I'm going to get the best education. And all these things are going to happen at Stanford. They're not going to happen somewhere else. And so what this then does is it begs, but what's very clear is Stanford is a prestigious university. And when you graduate,
Yeah.
you're going to have a Stanford diploma, and that's going to be worth something that is, so, but the question is, what's the outcome you're trying to maximize? Okay,
Mhm.
and I ask that question because if what you're thinking is what if we all could agree to make choices that would make the world more fair, right? Then the answer to that question is status is a terrible proxy for making decisions. But if the question is, how do I move quickly to a decision that's on average a decent decision, the answer I would give you is status is an amazing proxy. So, so it kind of depends on the outcome, which I think, and I think you were
Mm.
maybe thinking of the first outcome and not the second outcome, but
Exactly. So thank you. That I love the way that you frame that, because again, the end result of what we're trying to achieve, there's layers there, right? There's the first order layer of I need a degree, right? But there's on a bigger scale, I want to have more fairness. I want to have a more all encompassing world. Well, then that's not a good proxy in that case. And so there's the multiple layers to this. As you said, it was a super simple question to answer for you. So there you go.
yeah,
And you did it in less than 35 minutes.
yeah,
So I say bravo. Um, One of the things that struck me about the book is this idea of, when it comes to bestowing this anointed, crown on someone, that it reminds me, reminded Kurt and I actually, of the messenger effect in behavioral science, where the person who is saying it, because of their status, has greater influence or less influence depending on their particular status. When they say, "Well, we're going to anoint this person," if it's the person of the right status, if it's the right messenger, they can actually have greater influence on how we perceive that. Am I getting that right?
you're getting it 100% right, and just to restate, I mean, what your point is that the high status can anoint and the low status can't, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I mean, and that is, and when you ask about power or isolation, the thing about having high status is it conveys many things, including power. So status and power are not identical concepts, but status always implies power, right? I mean, you can
Mm.
have power without status because you can, have sort of the official power of office to sanction, and like nobody could respect you, but you could still have the power to sanction. I wonder who
We-
falls into that category these days. But um, but but so status implies power, but one of the powers is the power to anoint. And one of the really, there are many, many, many fascinating things about status, but like one is like, it's like whenever I think about resources, I'm reminded of this like environmental economics class I took when I was an undergraduate at Carleton College, and thought I would add that,
Good
Nice
Minnesota
Minnesota
reference.
connection.
There we go.
yeah,
Yes.
Well
yeah,
done. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I took this class from my favorite undergraduate teacher on environmental economics, and like there's a split between renewable and non-renewable resources, and like many resources are non-renewable. That is, when you deploy them, they're gone. Okay, like money's interesting because if you spend it, it's gone. Though
Yep.
there's the other side of money, which is usually if you have money, you somehow manage to make more money.
Mhm.
But in principle, when you spend capital, it disappears. Status doesn't if you spend it carefully. Which is so I have the so if I have status, if an organization or a person has status, they have the power to anoint, but they have to be a little bit careful about it, because if you repeatedly anoint the wrong, and I'm going to put wrong in quotes, but because that's a pretty nuanced concept. But if you repeatedly anoint the wrong people. So as that is, in other words, like imagine if Stanford University chose out of the bottom of the high school class instead of the top of the high school class, what would happen to the value of the Stanford brand, right? I mean, it's going to
Right.
depreciate pretty quickly. So
Right.
so you have to be careful about who you anoint. But then on the other hand, it isn't like, so let's say Stanford prints I don't know, 3,000 degrees this year in at graduation, whatever the number was, however many undergrads are. It's not like it had to like give up X percentage of its status for each of the diplomas that it offered, which bestowed status on somebody else, right? So it's a very peculiar kind of a resource.
It's really interesting when you bring that up, because I think there's that aspect of being freely available, right? As you said, it's that it's the sunlight, right? There's you can get energy from sunlight, and there's still more sunlight that's coming in, and you're not doing it. But that careful part of it, and I can think about this. You talked about Stanford, but if I was somebody who was a VP inside of an organization, and I'm starting to be very careful about who I anoint as kind of the up and coming people within the organization. I can do that for many people, but I have to be careful about it from what I'm hearing you say, because if I pick the wrong people and they pan out, that could then negatively impact my status. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly right. So, if you, I mean, I'm an academic, so I'll be an academic for a second. Like, you have this. So if you're a professor at a prestigious university, you have certain anointment powers, and one of them is for graduate students when they go out on the job market, right? And it says like,
Mhm.
and anointment matters where in places where there are information problems, and we should put that out. So
Mhm.
so there's an information asymmetry, and this is an incredibly prevalent problem, right? I mean, so there's the whole world is filled with situations where one party has more information than the other, and we call that a situation of asymmetric information. So imagine like you're a VP in a company and somebody's working for you,
Yeah.
or you're a professor at a university and you have a graduate student. Like you know more about those people than whoever an audience is for them, right? Because you've had all this time with them and you like see how they think and how they work and their work ethic and how quickly they respond to emails and all the and they're all the things. So you have more information than other people, and when you then make a referral, right, what you're doing is you're kind of putting your reputation on the line with each
Yeah.
of those referrals. And if somebody accepts that referral and they make a job offer, or they use somehow this person you're recommending and it turns out to be a total dud, what are they going to think? They're going to think, like the next time you come around and you push somebody, they're going to think, a little less sure I want to buy this one, like, and that's the brakes on the anointment dynamic. It's also why it's not entirely irrational, right? Because people kind of understand that, like, so taking athletes that endorse products, because these are another form
Mhm.
of status transfer. um, Athletes are going to, if you're a big name athlete, you're probably going to spend a little bit of time investigating the brand. Like, you're not going to just take the paycheck. You're going to look into the brand, the company, the product, or your people will do that because, you're worried about attaching your name to something that then has the potential to denigrate your name. But what's interesting, and I want to come back because I love this. I mean, like you guys have me thinking about the sun. So,
Yep.
because the sun is a renewable resource, but the sun is a resource that isn't renewed by its use. Okay,
Right.
so it's a renewable resource, like the sun shines every day, and at the same intensity. But like, if there's a whole bunch of solar cells on planet Earth, right? We aren't recharging the sun. We're just, capturing that energy to use here.
Yeah.
But the and so let me throw out, but in status, it's different because it's a two-way street. Okay, so now imagine what happens is I refer I send a PhD student off into the job market and I refer them like super strongly, and then they just hit a grand slam in the first couple
Right.
years of their career, right? Then like that then elevates my status, right? And so you have this like, this kind of chicken and egg thing going on all the time, like, the right people show up at the right nightclub, right? And
Yeah.
but the nightclub's the right nightclub because the right people show up at it, but the right people show up at it because it's the right nightclub, right? So you actually
Yeah.
have this reciprocal exchange system, whereas the sun, it's just we're not sending anything back when we consume solar here.
Yeah.
It,
No, I love it.
it reminds me of a conversation we had with Rosalind Chow a few months ago. Rosalind is a professor in the Social and Decision Sciences Department at Carnegie Mellon with George Lowenstein, and we were asking her about power versus status, and she
Mhm.
quickly went to status. She's like, "Well, that's the big thing. It's not so much about power." But I want to read you a quote and just get your reaction to this here, Toby. She said. The goal of networking is to gain status rather than power. And you do that by helping other people. You need other people to give you status. You can't have status in a social vacuum.
Yeah. So that last piece is 100, is so the last piece of this is 100% true. And then we could spend the rest of the show talking about the sort of the intermediate segment of that system. So you're like, I'm going on a ferry this afternoon. Like it's a very short ferry, so I'm going to be fine, even though there's a hurricane swell somewhere around here
Oh,
these days.
Oh,
Today,
wow.
because that's what's happening today on the east coast of the United States. But imagine you're on that ferry ride and it capsizes and it's a Gilligan's Island thing, but there's only Gilligan, right? So so you end up on the island all by yourself, right?
Okay.
There's no status on that island, right? There's no social status. There's just you.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
you
the
can think of
multiple people in
yourself.
my head have different statuses,
Yeah.
though. So
Well,
that's a
that's
whole.
right. So right. And the schizophrenic's mind, their status, but
For most normal
there's
people,
no,
yes. All right, yeah.
yeah, but like in the kind of like, the way we classically think of status is it is deference paid to you by other people, but you need another person there. Right.
Yeah.
And then, and for that deference to be created. So status is a social relationship. And you could think about, in fact, this is exactly the work that my dissertation advisor did that, is what drew me into this whole. I mean, there was this when I went to get a PhD, I was not planning on working on this topic. I discovered it sort of early on, and it just radically changed how I thought about things. And it became I guess an avocation, and I mean, it became how not only my work, but how I started to think about things. So,
Mm.
but he saw status as a network, like it is
Mm.
a
Oh,
set of deference relationships, and then when you think about it that way, like status is a gift somebody else gives you, and but we live in a world that's an exchange system, so I have to give something back. Okay, and so I think the midsection of that sentence is the thing that I give to somebody is help, and when I give them help, they return that help with
yeah.
honor or respect. But there are other ways to earn their honor and their respect, um, that is less about helping them and more about other forms of activity or contribution or things you've done. Like, they admire you not because you've ever done anything nice or kind or considerate, but because you're crushing it on some performance dimension, or
Mm.
because other people that they really admire, or right. And so the exchange system is a lot more complicated than like, you give me different, I do something nice and you give me deference in return.
It's not a tit for tat then component in a very simplistic manner
And
from
not
that.
in a narrow sense, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You brought up an interesting piece about the network component of this, which raised a thought in my head, about the hierarchy of status. Is there a set hierarchy of there's the status kind of ladder that you climb up, and
Yeah.
in a network, is that different? Again, we started off talking about the status within a gang is very different than the status of my Rotary Club, which is very different than the status of, the business organization that I'm in.
Yeah.
How does that
Yeah.
all parlay into this?
I mean, I know we're already most of the way through, but can I just say I'm loving this conversation with you guys. So it's good, great, great set of questions.
You can
And
say that 5 more times.
I mean,
That's so kind of you. Thanks, Toby. Yeah.
a great set of questions, and just so that one, is there like a set hierarchy? My answer is yes and no. I mean, so
Okay.
there's so like if and I'm sorry to keep talking about my world, but I live in such a status based world, right? So
Mhm.
if you take a field, so you need some kind of bounded ish social group. So if you take like a field of study and then you go to people in the field and you say, like, who's the high, like, create the status hierarchy for this field, and they do, what you're going to find is that people are going to have a little bit different senses of what the hierarchy are. So probably not radically different. Like everybody's going to agree, like these are, these 20 people are like the big people. And like, but one may say this one's first and this one's third most influential or something like that. Right. And so you'll have these, and all groups have social hierarchies in them, but that doesn't mean that they have full consensus about what the
Mm.
hierarchy is. And in particular, I think they're not good studies on this, so I'm telling you what I think. I think
It's a
what
podcast. You
off,
can do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I can do that, right? And it's and not being quite pinned to the wall in an academic seminar, but
Right.
so I think one of the things that is very very common is that we as individuals have a different sense of what our status is than the rest of the group. So like we so there's a little dissensus about the ranking, but probably not radically so. Like if you take an academic field, for example, no one's going to find something that someone who's in the field that no one's really ever heard of and say like that's that one's the big name. Like that isn't going to happen. But you could see
Right.
sort of minor disagreements, but ranks would be highly correlated. But we often feel that we have the wrong status. And more commonly than not, we probably feel like we deserve a higher status than we have. But there are certainly, people who feel the opposite. And there are
Yeah.
probably personality and trait characteristics that underlie that. And we don't we know a little bit about this, but we don't know a ton about it. But what it means is that we often do a little bit of status jockeying because we think there's room to move up a little bit. And we want that, right? And so you can think of in any sort of small group setting as the hierarchy is a little bit contested, and
Yeah.
people are looking for ways to climb the ranks.
Yeah. I I'm just gonna go out on a ledge here because I'm thinking of John Rawls' veil of ignorance model.
Yeah,
And right, so like his thesis is if you were to design a society, how would you design it? From scratch. Would you, if you had that, magic wand, Toby? Would you go back and say, I'm going to design it without any kind of status hierarchies, or would you modify them in
yeah.
some way?
I mean, this to me is just the greatest thought experiment of all time. I mean, I read John Rawls as an undergraduate, and I think when I discovered the literature on status, it was probably partly that made me gravitate so much
Mm.
to it. So Rawls runs this thought experiment and he says, okay, like imagine, I think of it as like there's a cosmic waiting room and
Mm.
you're in the cosmic waiting room. Like you're about to be born, but you haven't been born yet. And it's a 100% lottery where, what, to whom, how, you'll be born, which is in fact exactly what happens. Like we don't choose anything about our birth conditions, right? They're 100% handed to us. So you don't know if you're male, female, You don't know if you're 6'5" or 3'4". You don't know if you have no idea what shade of complexion you have. You don't know whether you're Japanese, Chinese, Ghanese, or, a Minnesotan. You know, none of these things. And then the question is, so none of us can really do this. Like, we're not really capable of running a thought experiment. But the question is, what's the world you want to enter?
Yeah.
And Rawls argues that the world you're going to want to enter is a way more equal world than the world that we have. Like, you're not, and this gets into like, are you risk averse in the cosmic waiting room or not? Right. And most of us, like that becomes, that becomes the big thing. Are you risk averse or not? But most of us, according to Rawls, would choose to enter a world where there's much more equality than we have. And I love that. And I think I think everybody should walk through that thought experiment to understand what they have or what they don't have in terms of status that comes from ascriptive characteristics. Like, here we are, like three white guys talking on a show who lived our lives in a period where, if you could choose to be anything, probably what you wanted to be was a Caucasian American, right? Because you had a lot of advantages that other people didn't have if you were born into that group over our lifespans. So so everybody should sort of think about, the lottery that actually determined what we have. And the other way to put it, by the way, this quote that I've always loved, that that I think, I think there's a tiny bit about debate about this, but it's usually attributed to the football coach Barry Switzer, and the quote goes, which I think most people have heard, is like, he's talking about someone and he's like, that guy was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple.
Yeah.
And that's the cosmic lottery. Like, whoever it was, like, was born to affluent parents with a lot of privilege, or like with this incredible innate ability and didn't have to work very hard to realize it and all of that. But the problem with all of that is, if you end up in this equal world, you still have this situation where you have a million decisions you have to make about life. Like, you have to decide which doctor to go to, and you have to decide which accountant to use, and which lawyer to hire, maybe, and what car to buy and what phone to buy. And like, there's this endless number of choices you have to make. And the argument I would make is, like, left to our own devices, if we remove like status-based inequality from the world, those choices become a lot more difficult, and we're going to just get mired down. So, like, we might ideologically or on moral grounds or ethical grounds not love this system, but from a more kind of pragmatic, something has to get done today, like, I got to make choices, it's a very valuable way to screen things. And let me throw out, I just wrote an editorial on this. I think this sort of pedigree is going to become even more important for a while in terms of how we make decisions, because it's one of the ways in which AI is going to mess with everything.
Expand on that. What do you mean? How is AI going to mess with everything, and what does the role of status play then in adjusting to that, or responding to that?
Yeah, so I do. I have a pretty complicated work life, and so one of the companies that I'm really involved in is Workday. So I think a lot about, and I'm involved with Workday. I mean, great set of people and remarkable business, but I'm also partly involved in it because I'm at the moment very concerned about what happens with the future of work in an AI age, right? Because, let's not even talk about Notebook LLM on a podcast, but pretty wild, right? But
Yes.
like,
Yep.
so imagine now it's like 2025 and you're an employer, and you're a big company, and you have to screen resumes and cover letters. Okay, and so in all of the past, when you saw resumes and cover letters, there were like the information in those were not like it's not 100% accurate. And there's like, but there is information in what's in front of you, right? I mean, at least on average, like in any particular case, you might have a cover letter or resume somebody submitted that someone else wrote. But now it's like there's no difference at all because, GPT, whatever version we're on, or Gemini, whatever version we're on, or Claude, whatever version we're on, um, is going to write a very similar, kind of in terms of at least the surface level kind of writing quality and all of that. And so, but the same, so we face what I would call an evaluation crisis already because we can't tell anymore what's human created versus what's Gen AI created. And if what we want to do is evaluate a human based on like documents and output and soon even, art and video and all the things, right? Because these things are also so great. We have this huge uncertainty problem, right? So what it does is it takes the uncertainty problem in an evaluative space and makes it larger than it was in the past, which is exactly when we default to status markers, right? Because you can't evaluate the thing in front of you. So you're just going to evaluate the pedigree of the person or the organization. So I think at least for the short term, we're going to see an even heavier reliance on pedigree and status markers than we have in the past.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I never thought about it from that perspective. Just again, using your resume cover letter approach, the writing quality, there's an implied element of that 10 years ago, right? If I wrote really good prose and had well articulated thoughts that were in good, concise sentences that read easily, I could make some inferences about you as a candidate, given however that would relate to the job that's there. Today, that no longer stands because I'm being assisted by or helped by AI, which then I could start really crappy and have really horrible writing abilities and prose, but because of the tool, so no longer is that an evaluative kind of checkbox that I can use. And so now it's like, okay, so what are those checkboxes that I can use? And you're saying status is going to be in the near future, at least, probably one that we can count on. Is that correct?
Yeah, you just said that 10 times better than me. That's like what I mean. I'm gonna respond to that by saying what he said. Like
That's good. I'm segueing into music because the music industry is a hierarchical, anointed, status oriented, organization. Grammys, the Grammy Awards are not always about literally the best artist or the best songwriter or the best song, but these artists get anointed and they move along. Uh, yeah, you brought up you talked about losing my religion in the book, which I thought was pretty great. Which I kind of have to ask: is REM a favorite band first? I
So, I
suppose.
mean, I'll admit that REM was my college band, and
Okay,
I
okay, fair
think
enough.
and I think REM is the only. It's certainly the only band I've seen live more than twice.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and you'll remember these guys. The Replacements were in town when I was at Carleton, and so I did see the
Yeah.
Replacements a couple of times. But I mean, I was like the closest I've ever come to be a groupie was REM. Like REM was, I'd say maybe Bowie and REM were my college music. Um, when I wasn't listening to jazz, pretending I smoked. So.
In the basement of the
And in
cathedral.
the,
Yeah.
in the basement
Yeah.
of the Carleton College Cathedral, yeah.
Well, I guess. Gosh, so many questions, so little time. When you think about an industry that's really built on status, do you think that, or to what degree are we really missing out on really great talent? I mean, just
Yeah. Oh, so much. And Yeah, and I wish we had more time because we are let me say it a
Yeah.
second time. You guys are fantastic interviewers, and this is a lot of fun. And I wish I didn't have stuff all afternoon so we could hang out and talk, even if we weren't recording. So, but yeah, I mean, there's the obvious cases. So, like the book has like lots of fun with wine,
Yeah.
and with art,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so. But if you take any of the
Great.
kind of classically cultural markets, right, these are like ground zero for status dynamics. Music, certainly, because there's no real sense of quality. Like, I mean, you know art, like you walk into. So I spent my whole morning doing art stuff, and it's a side project I'm working on right now. I learned a lot about art in the process of writing the book because I found it increasingly, the art market in particular, increasingly fascinating as I was doing this. And the book opens with an art story, but art is an example of this product where, like, you walk into, say, a gallery and you like see an artifact, like a painting on the wall, and like, I think most of us are going to react immediately. Like, you say, like, I like it, I don't, it's okay, I want to think about it. Like, you're going to be somewhere in that spectrum. But if you ask, so if I walk into a gallery, that's what I'll say. No, if you ask me if it's a good piece of art, I'm going to look at you and say, I have no idea. Like, I mean, I'll say, like, it appeals to me, but I have no idea. So, like, if it costs money, like it does, like, I have no idea if I want to spend the money because I don't know if it's a good investment or a terrible investment. Like, I have no
Right.
idea. Um, but if you then told me, it says talking about this morning. So if you then told me it's a Cezanne, then I'm like, oh, well, that's a great piece of art. I love it, because and so if you think about what's happened there, like, I mean, it's what I just did is, in the book, I call it the big shift, which is I
Yeah.
evaluated the art not by the object, but by the entity who's associated with it. And it turns out in markets, in ways we probably don't have time to get into, but the book does. If in all markets, if you're evaluating something based on sort of how you see the producer versus how you see the product, you're going to see a completely different set of dynamics than if you only evaluated the product per se. And I would argue that this is a critical effect of status on how economic markets function. But before we leave the topic, and the reason I also love this question is what really got me to study status is, I read this paper that was so eye-opening to me when I was in my first year of graduate school. And it's an old paper by a very prominent sociologist. It's called The Matthew Effect in Science. It's very short. And what the paper basically shows is that, like, and I had, to just slightly contextualize this, I had actually gone to get a PhD, because I had been told, I was this like super naive undergraduate. I had been told that, like, if you go get a job in the corporate world, like, it's just all about, you know, sort of ingratiating yourself to the boss and, like, kind of who you know and how you behave and how you network. It's like a networking project. And I'm like, I don't want to go into that world. I think I'm going to suck at it. Like, I should go into the one that's just like based on hard work and merit. And so I thought that science was going to be this, like, because in science of all fields, like, if you're not in it, you're just going to look at it and you're going to think, well, like, the papers that are important are the ones that are about great ideas. Like, people who come
Yeah.
up with great ideas and do careful work are the ones who, like, they're the successful sciences. And then it turns out, like, that's so naive. And it's like a ground zero status system. So even in areas that are in sort of industries that you would think are way more objective, and where they're way more objective quality, sort of measures of quality, status processes are super important.
So, for our listeners, real quick, Matthew effect. Tell us, is it in a short summary, what the Matthew effect is?
Yeah, the Matthew effect, is just this. It's super simple. It's the rich get richer.
Yeah.
And the idea, and we really believe that many aspects of status work like that. And by that I mean, if you get just a little bit of a head start, so you get a little more status than other people, it has this property of compounding over time. So the tiny little advantage you start out with, like you becomes this huge advantage over a career or a lifetime, in music, in art, in science, in technology, in entrepreneurship, in many different areas. And that's the inequality of it all, right? Because you just
Yeah.
start off with these modest differences in terms of individuals that then amplify over time, and so the book dives into that a lot.
It does. And it's a really interesting part of the book. Toby, we're going to have you back. We're going to have to talk about all of this in some other time where we get to dig in deeper, because there are so many questions that we have that are still blank on the page here, as well as many more that I've thought up as just from the conversation. So,
Okay. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about some musicians that have influenced you in your life. If you were on a desert island and had a listening device that could store two musical artists, their whole catalog, but just two, which two would you choose?
That's easy. Mozart and Duke Ellington.
oh,
Wow. I love how quickly you went to both of those. That's fantastic.
I
Uh,
mean, but if you made me choose two bands, I mean, I would tell you to F off. I'm not going to.
oh. But you mentioned jazz a couple times. You're not going to Herb Peterson or
I mean,
Bird or Miles
I might
Davis.
have. I might have said Miles Davis. I might have said Thelonious. I might have,
Oh yeah,
but I would have like I would have a great jazz catalog and a great classical catalog if I were stuck on an island with only two things, right? And
yeah, that's true. Very true.
that's what I would do. And
but you by choosing Mozart and Duke Ellington, you've got big catalogs with both of them and a wide
I which
variety. So
which is top of mind. So
variety,
in that
absolutely.
question. So
Toby Stewart, thank you so much for being a guest on Behavioral Groups. We've so enjoyed this.
I've loved it as well. It's a lot of fun, and really, truly great questions. Thanks a million for having me.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Toby, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our anointed brains.
Anointing is really important.
Yeah.
I agree with Toby's thesis here that it's a really critical part of what's going to helps us figure out what status really means.
Well, and I think here's the thing, is that Behavioral Grooves needs to be anointed as the top
Oh,
behavioral science podcast out there. So all of our listeners need to you just need to anoint us that, and then
and
we'll run
Duke,
with it. We'll thank you, and we'll say we appreciate it, and then we'll run with it.
so you could help us by just leaving a review. Just give us a
Anointing us
rating. Yes.
by saying, hey, or just telling your friends, going that the best podcast out there by far across the board is Behavioral Grooves, particularly if you're interested in behavioral science or just having fun. There you go.
It doesn't even have to be best in the universe. It could just be best on Earth.
Just best on Earth. Forget those Martians. Forget those,
I'm already
Saturnians,
preempting
those Jupiterians, those guys. We kick their
Jupiterians.
ass. Yeah. All right. Let's get back to grooving on Toby and this anointment and status component. What do you want to groove on, Mr. Houlihan?
I'm excited about Toby's comments about AI and how confusing AI is making our world right now, and how it relates to status and and sort of what that means. So I think that he really keys into something, this idea of disruption, because AI is absolutely a disruptive force, and there are
Mhm.
definitely good things, right? It enhances our life. It, I mean, if I want to cook a new recipe, I don't have to go to a recipe book. I don't have to go to a cookbook. I can go to ChatGPT and just say, I've got these three things I've got pickles and mayonnaise and Braunschweiger in my refrigerator. What should I make? And it will come back with a recipe for me. It's fantastic. It will help me evaluate things. It will help me write. AI will help me plan trips. So there's a lot of enhancements.
I just want to know what recipe it's going to come up with Braunschweiger pickles and mayonnaise. I think this would be, if it could come up with a decent recipe. My God, AI is like the best thing ever. I mean, oh my God.
Totally an
Why would those be
enhancement.
the three things you have in your refrigerator? Oh, excuse
Well,
me.
because I
But
like
we
them. I like
digress.
those things. I like
I
those
do.
things.
That they're all wonderful, but to come up with a recipe, what is it? It's a Braunschweiger sandwich. There you go. Easy,
With
done.
pickles.
With pickles. Oh my God. All right. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. No. So this AI piece I think is really interesting, and obviously people can tell that behavioral groups we're not a AI driven podcast here, but
no.
yeah. But I think it is interesting because all right, getting serious. This idea that we could always look, he talked about merit, right? And this idea of merit being part, like if somebody wrote a really good resume,
Mhm.
that showed something about that person. Right now, they might have had a lot of help. They might have, even
Yep.
had somebody else do it for them, but that was much less likely. It wasn't the norm. And now a resume is going to be gone through AI to write it so that it sounds fantastic. So now I don't have that indication of the quality of this candidate anymore based upon the quality of their resume. And I
Same,
think that changes a whole
that's
bunch of how we have to evaluate people.
it does. So any business presentation, just about any business communication could be run through AI to be slicked up and well produced and honed in such a way that maybe not today, but I could imagine in years to come could just be exceptional. And and that kind of leads to a question about how do we know? How does a manager know, for instance, how good that employee is?
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of the one of the underlying questions.
Well, and I know we were going to get into this later, but let's get into it now. This idea of, does that matter? I mean, if we are truly looking at the output, if we're saying we're hiring you to deliver X, and X needs to be of a certain quality, right? That's typically when we think
Yeah.
of knowledge workers. When we think of any kind of manufacturing job or different pieces, you are hired to do X. X has to meet certain standards, certain qualities. Does it matter how that gets done?
Yeah, and I think it does bring up a really interesting question about the business community. In For the last 70 years, has very much focused on results. It kind of almost doesn't matter how you get there. Strategy has been less important than what kind of results the strategy produces. And I think if we continue to only value the results, AI will be fine. But it could reduce critical thinking. It could
Mhm.
actually disable the people who are driving for those results from actually being critical about what are the ways that we should get there. Does the end always justify the means?
Yeah, I mean, you and I both agree. I think that that's not the
Yeah,
case, right? I mean, we don't
exactly.
want to cheat. We
Exactly.
don't want to do that. That being said, is AI cheating? Is that there? And to the degree that, part of the issue, I think, in today with AI being it's the hallucinations, it's the if you ask AI to come up with what are these studies that support, statuses being different pieces, and you ask them that, it'll give you a few research papers that are there, but it might also make up
Yep.
research papers.
Yep.
And
We've both
and
had that experience where it
and
literally just made it up. Yep.
it might tell you things that, unless you know, how, some have intimate knowledge of this, it is very convincing in how it conveys things. And so it may tell you things that are wrong, but it says it in a very convincing way, like how to make a Braunschweiger pickle and mayonnaise sandwich that tastes awesome. And you go, awesome, I'm going to do this. And then it tastes like shit, So that is one of the things that is, I think it's an issue. Now, does that, does that supersede the ability to just get a really great recipe? Maybe if you had better ingredients, I don't know. But I think this is the hard part, right? And so coming
Yeah.
back to Toby, I think the important piece here is, all right, we how do we evaluate? How do we evaluate
Yes.
how good somebody is? And again, I know this is a big issue. I just went to a panel discussion on AI, and they had an educator in there. And one of the big things that they're looking at is, how do we assess if somebody knows this information? How they can, particularly, it's an online, the educator was an online thing, and he was talking about how people, they get an assessment, they can just put it into AI and it answers it 90%, they get an A. But they haven't done it, they haven't learned it. So how do you assess their capability? And I think it goes back to Toby is, all right, you can be anointed. I mean, I can vouch for you as an individual,
Yeah.
and
But
so
but
you
but
could vouch for me.
but how are you going to know that I'm good enough? And that's going to take real life authentic interactions. Like you're going to actually get to know me, and you're going to have to see me in different situations, right? That allows you to feel comfortable saying, I'm willing to anoint him. I'm willing to
Yeah,
say that this guy actually knows his stuff.
yeah.
And then the other option would be pedigree or certification or some kind of objective thing. But I know I guess is it possible that someone could completely manipulate that? Like, could I have in my resume that I'm certified in Adobe and Microsoft Windows and Azure and all this stuff?
And I did
But
it using AI because they
right,
didn't, like,
right.
I actually have that certificate, but I used AI in order to get it. So, and again, so it just becomes more and more important to be able to have that anointment from a real person, as opposed to even some of the other things I think there. Now, Tim, this was I mean, in the book, and kind of in talking with Toby, the focus in on art, right? And how
Yeah.
what is good art is often determined not by what we think, but if that art is anointed as good art. And this
For a
comes
long
into,
time. Yeah, for a long
for a
time
long
that's been
time,
the
this has
case. Yeah.
always been. I mean, why is Picasso a Picasso, and George Smith out there, who did something that looks very similar to Picasso, but it isn't, and that sells for $100, and Picasso sell for millions, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about art and music and thinking about AI, what are the broader implications for that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because in the world of AI, then you kind of have to wonder, well, who generated it? Who was the generator of that art, that music, that piece that we're listening to or viewing? And does it matter in the world, right? If it all comes down to being anointed, what if the credible source said that's still a good piece, that's still a good song, or the masses decided it's a good song, even though it was generated by an AI source? I kind of think maybe it doesn't matter when it
Well,
comes to something subjective as music or art. I'm not advocating for AI to generate music, or especially as a songwriter. I'm not an advocate of that. I still think that people need to create. People need to publish their own music and to create their own art. But what the public likes is up to what the public likes, I think.
Okay, but this comes into an interesting piece. Do you feel different about a love song that, or a heartbreak song, or a painting that depicts some human emotion, and you look at it or you hear it and you think about the person who wrote this, felt those emotions, had that, and now is it different because I put in, love song into AI, create me a great love song, and it pops out and the lyrics are
Fantastic.
wonderful and they
Yeah.
they get a cool, sad, minor chord progression to give you the sadness, right? I don't know. Does that change how if I know that versus if I don't know that, right? If I don't know that, I can still feel that. But if I do know that it was generated by AI, does that change how I'm listening to that song? Does it pull at my heartstrings the same way that if you had written that song just by yourself?
Well, I think that depends on how you want to experience music. If there's a lot of people who listen to music who don't care about the artist or the generation process, because they just like the beat. It's served up on a playlist and it was good enough, and that's all they need. So that's sort of a end justifying the means. But there are a group of people that I think care about the state of the artist themselves, the creator. And this also ports over to the business world, where now we have to ask the question of how do we determine a merit-based advancement system if we can't identify where the merit is coming from? Is the merit coming from the person or from the AI partners that they've got involved?
So I might actually push back against what you just said there, because I don't know if on the musical part that there are certain people who just listen to it has a good beat, I can dance to it, I give it a 9, or whatever that would be, right? I think there is a priming and a component of effect that always, regardless of the music, it comes from a person, and there's some aspect to that I think is different than just being mechanically created. Maybe I'm wrong. I probably am wrong.
Well,
But
I mean, it's hard to separate. If we take Taylor Swift and to take the songs that she's created, I don't think you can easily separate the product of her work from her persona at this
yeah,
point because of her brand. But when she was, 17 and she was just getting started, there wasn't that much persona. There was certainly producers trying to create a persona around her, but I'm not sure if a song that she wrote connected to Taylor Swift when she was 17 versus a song that sounded exactly like that was created by AI would have mattered. Like a song, for instance, for
hmm,
me, like if I played you a song and said I wrote this, you'll have, and then I play another song and you go, oh, I like that too, and you go, well, actually, I didn't write that. That was an AI generated song, but I'm playing it. I don't think, for me, with the audience that I have and the scope of branding that I have, would make a difference. I don't know.
yeah. You bring up. I mean, it's a really good point, and you do think your component on merit based promotions and or reviews at the end of the year, it's a difficult question, right? I mean, if I'm
Yeah.
really good at being able to tap into AI and I can get the output that we need, is that good? Is that a good thing? Or do I need to be able to do that on my own? And depending upon the situation that you're in, depending upon the type of work that you do, it might be different. I mean, there is a bigger question here: is AI ultimately, uh, does it democratize this? So it says, like,
Yeah.
you could go to, get a graduate degree, or have 30 years experience, but doesn't matter because I now have the knowledge of the world at my
Yeah.
fingertips to be able to, apply that knowledge, probably maybe even better than your 30 years and graduate degree, does it for you. Or is there something innately valuable about that?
Right. Will it entrench the existing hierarchies that are in place to say wherever you are in the status that we're going to kind of lock you in there? Or, as you said, does it democratize? Does it say it doesn't matter how much pedigree you have? That if your output, again, this kind of gets back to my original question, are in the business world, are we still going to value the end over the means? Are we still going to value the results over how we got to the results? And I think if we continue to emphasize just whatever the results are, then that might be a huge democratization. It it could be.
It could be, but what does that mean? Does it mean that anybody can do a podcast like this? And we could have I mean, there are already examples of that out there. There's a company that's like pushing out 5,000 podcasts a week, and
Yeah,
they're all AI generated. And again, right now, people who listen to it say it's mostly slop, it's crap, it doesn't have a coherent
yeah.
component, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, same thing they say about us, but
but that'll change on AI, but it won't change about us.
exactly. I mean, there is that element that it
Uh,
will get better. It will get to the point where it will be a podcast that talks about behavioral science that conveys the same or better information than what we're doing. So if I'm
yeah,
listening, do I care that it's Tim and Kurt doing this because I feel some affinity towards them?
yeah,
Um, and there's some value in that affinity and in that kind of being human part, or is it just here's I want to learn about loss aversion, and I want to hear the components of Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky's their take on that. You can get that from an AI generated podcast. Is that going to then make us a dinosaur? Are we going to be kicked out to the curb? What's it going to do? And then if that's the case, where else? I mean, how is that going to just change society? So,
Well, as always, it's good to end on one of your epistles, and I think that that's great. But is there anything else? Is it okay to wrap up here?
I don't know. It sounds good to me. It just I'm going down a rabbit hole of depression and sadness of like, oh my God,
Oh, I
life as
know.
we know it is not going to be the same. So,
No, no. We should just remind listeners that this is the last episode before we publish, last episode we published before our October 16th, 2025 event in Minneapolis. Okay, not the last episode ever.
well,
Just
AI might make this the last episode ever because it'll just improve, and it'll be AI behavioral grooves, and people listen to that much more than us. Anyway, no, yes, it go out, get your tickets, join us in Minneapolis. It's live. You will actually know that we are not AI generated visions, that we are actual people, and we are, in the flesh, that we have a heart and a brain that doesn't really operate like it should, but we're there.
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Well, back to Toby. What we see from Toby Stewart's work is that there is a looming AI evaluation crisis, and we're going to see a fundamental shift in how human capability gets addressed. And frankly, I'm not ready for it.
No, I'm not ready for it either. And when Toby predicts that we'll lean even harder on pedigree and status markers, yeah, I don't think he's celebrating this trend, but I think he might be warning us about it, and it's probably a warning we should all heed.
Yeah. Maybe the most important question isn't whether AI will disrupt our current systems, because it already has. Maybe the big question is whether we'll use this disruption as an opportunity to create fairer ways of recognizing human potential, or whether we're just going to retreat into the comfortable but flawed shortcuts of status and pedigree. Yeah. Something to think about.
Talk about epistles. There you go, man. Oh my God. The choice, as they say, is ours. And we hope that you make the right choices this week, or the good choices, as you go out and find your groove.